Hello and welcome to today's comprehensive news analysis by Byju's IAS. Before we begin the class today, an important announcement that is, there is an upcoming national scholarship test by Byju's IAS which gives you a chance to earn up to 90% of scholarship for your course here at Byju's. The test is on 14th of November 11 a.m. The last date to register is 13th of November, that is Saturday 6 p.m. The link to register will be given in the description of this video. Let's begin with our discussion for today. And the first article that we will be discussing is on demonetization in India. The decision of the government to demonetize rupees 500 and rupees 1000 notes have just completed 5 years. Thus, you see a series of articles taking a look at the government's decision, arguing about the merits and demerits, and suggesting whether or not the decision was worth it. This particular editorial in the Hindu newspaper today strongly argues against the decision of demonetization which the government took abruptly. It gives us a chance to look at the present scenario. Were the goals of demonetization achieved or not? And what is the way forward? The author argues that the decision to demonetize was not really based on facts, rather, it was based on myths. The myth that the author is talking about is the myth of black money. Ever since our childhood, we have been fed into our minds that there is a lot of black money around in our economy. Although there are not many detailed discussions on it, most people would not know the facts about black money, but just the sound of black money itself sounds so evil that the people are ready to make any sacrifice in order to bring out that myth of black money. The author says that the government's decision to demonetize these notes was based on that myth, and the people supported it, thinking that it was more of a sacrifice that they are making for a better country altogether. However, as per the RBI, 99.3% of the currency notes that were cancelled, that is the 500 and 1000 rupees notes, have returned back to the banks, thus highlighting that the government's reasoning that most of the unaccounted notes will be taken out of circulation was rather false. There has not been any reduction in the circulation of black money, and in fact, just a couple of days back, there was an RBI report saying that the notes in circulation right now have increased even as compared to the pre demonetization levels. In fact, the currency notes in circulation right now account for about 14.5% of India's GDP, which is constantly increasing. Now, you might assume that with the rise in digital payments, with people hardly using ATMs these days, with people switching to Paytm, PhonePe, Google Pay, even the smallest of vendors on the roadside switching to these payment modes, you would assume that the cash in circulation would decrease, but this RBI report has rejected those assumptions. When the demonetization decision was taken by the government, the people who supported the decision gave multiple arguments about the demonetization. The first argument they gave was reduction in black money. That argument proved to be false because the RBI itself said that 99.3% notes have come back. The second argument given was that now, because most of the people have to give back their currency notes into the banks, their incomes would be accounted for, and thus India's tax base, that is the direct tax base, would increase. However, the author says that even that has not come true. There is no significant increase in the tax base in the country, and India still suffers from an extremely narrow direct tax collection. The cash in circulation, as I just pointed out, is now at a much higher level as compared to what it was 5 years back. The author says one of the reasons behind the failure of this policy is not non existence of black money. Rather, it is a misconception that black money would be kept in cash. The author says that most of the black money is kept in real estate and other assets, and not really in cash stored up in a wardrobe or under the bed. Despite the decision leading to suffering of crores of people across the country, the interesting part is that the government has not had to pay for it either in the elections or in popular discussions. One of the reasons for this, as per the author, is because of Indians' perception of making a sacrifice for their country. Since the people's discomfort was given the name of sacrifice, many people accepted them and took it on their chin. Secondly, as the author says, the myth of black money in India is so big that people are willing to go to any length to tackle that. Thirdly, the idea that the rich people suffered more as compared to poor or middle class people gave a sort of comfort to the poor people, thinking that for once the rich people also had to go through certain discomfort. However, in reality, none of them holds true and none of them has any reasoning behind it. The second article that we will be discussing today is based on India's push towards renewable energy. And this discussion starts from the recently held climate change summit at Glasgow, where India made a lot of tall commitments, including increasing our energy generation from renewable sources. In fact, generating 50% of our energy needs from renewable resources by 2030. The authors here start with the argument that India's per capita emission in energy is nowhere as compared to the developed world. It has neither been in the past nor at present do we emit anywhere close to the developed nations in the world. But even then, India has been forced by the other countries to cut down on its emissions, mainly because the total emissions of the country in India, because of our population, are pretty high. Now, although some people argue that India should not curb on its production of coal because India's development will be hurt, the authors say that this is a wrong argument. We cannot compare the past and decide for the future. Like India cannot say that we did not pollute the earth in the past, so now it is our chance to pollute the earth. Because if every country started taking its chance of polluting the earth or harming the environment, we would not be left with any earth to sustain. Just because we were ruled by the British in the past doesn't mean that India should now follow the argument that we want to rule the British to get it even. Rather, it is time for India to focus on renewable sources and can we cut down on energy production from coal and switch it to the renewable resources? The authors have pointed out India's capability of switching to renewable resources, especially solar and wind. Now, there has been a lot of talk about India's turn towards renewable energy, but the fact is, even today, close to 70% of India's energy production is dependent on coal. Just a couple of weeks back, you saw the entire discussion on national media about the shortage of coal and the possible power cuts throughout the country, which proved the fact that India still is highly dependent on coal. It gives us a good opportunity to look at where India currently stands in terms of energy generation from renewable sources. Now, India's coal imports are still one of the highest in the world, but luckily for India, we have no shortage of solar power availability in our country. So much so that India is constantly increasing its solar power generation by setting up huge solar power plants in many states. The authors also say that it is time for the developing world to come together, and rather than asking for developed nations to help them, the developing nations should cooperate with each other. Over here, it is important for you to understand a terminology. Usually, the word North refers to developed nations, while the word South refers to developing nations. So, when the authors say that South South cooperation must be encouraged, that means that developing nations amongst themselves should come together rather than looking up to the developed nations to help them out with money or with technology. Developing nations such as India have always been blessed with surplus labor. that can be put to excellent use for setting up renewable energy plants throughout the country, since we have been endowed with a lot of sources such as solar and wind. Also, the time is not on our side. The developing nations, being some of the most densely populated nations in the world, would always have the tougher end of the bargain on climate change. The impact of climate change, as seen in the developing nations, is much more horrible as compared to the developed nations because of longer coastlines and because of higher population density. It is also interesting to see what is the present status of India's energy generation. This is a table that I took from the website of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. I suggest you to go to the website of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and see their annual report for 2020-21. It's a long report telling you about the present status of renewable energy production and future plans in India. It has this table of wind power installation in the country state wise, which gives you an idea of how the country is moving in the right direction when it comes to power generation from wind. Not just this, India also has been constantly increasing its solar power capacity and recently has reached the fifth position globally, overtaking Italy in terms of solar power generation. In fact, in the past 5 years, our solar power capacity has increased by more than 11 times. In fact, this is what encouraged Prime Minister Modi to raise India's nationally determined contributions at the Glasgow summit. As you know, in the Paris Climate Summit, India had promised to generate 450 gigawatts of energy from renewable resources by 2030, but at Glasgow, we increased our commitment to producing 500 gigawatts of energy by 2030 from non fossil fuels. The power minister, in fact, recently said that India is on track to achieve this target easily before 2030. In line with India's push in the India has also initiated a couple of international programs such as the ISA, International Solar Alliance with France, that started in Paris, and also One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative that India suggested along with Britain at the Glasgow summit. The next article that we will be discussing today is a slogan no longer sectarian. Now, this article is essentially based on a recently released movie called Jai Bhim, as the name suggests, based on the ideology of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and about the atrocities that the Dalits still face in the country. Rather than going into the details of the movie, I thought it is a good time for us to look back at the legacy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, whose 130th birthday was celebrated this year. Interestingly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar does not get the kind of due that he deserves for the initiatives that he took during India's freedom struggle and in the years after that. His role as a crusader for the rights of the Dalits overshadows all the other things that he did for India and the different sections of the Indian society. When we talk about Ambedkar, we talk about two big things. First, we talk about his fights for giving rights to the Dalits that they rightly deserved. Secondly, people who criticize Ambedkar argue that he did not oppose the British rule as much as he should have. Ambedkar, on his side, said that I am fearful of the freedom that we will achieve because just by British leaving India does not mean that the Dalits and the depressed classes would get their due. And that is why his goal was more focused on building an egalitarian, a socially equal society rather than just throwing the British away and letting someone from India sit on the chair of the rulers. Apart from his talked about role for the Dalit rights, it is important to note that he also was a well acclaimed economist. He also played a major role in ensuring gender equality in the country after independence. He also had a very sharp mind about solving India's agriculture problem, and he took multiple initiatives for the labor class as well. Here are a few interesting facts about him. that many people might not know. Most of you would know that the establishment of RBI happened on the basis of recommendations of the Hilton Young Commission. However, what you might not know is that the commission actually took the idea from his book titled The Problem of the Rupee, Its Origin and Its Solution, which is still regarded as one of the best books written in the field of economics focusing on India. Not just this, he was also one of the first leaders in the Bombay Assembly and in the roundtable conferences to focus on the issues about the labor class, their right to strike, their right to have fair wages, their right to have fixed working hours, etc. Even the establishment of the Central Water Commission and Integrated Water Resources Management can be traced back to him because of his discussions and ideas these establishments came into being. Not just this, his role as a crusader for gender equity has also been shadowed. As a first law minister of India, he made it his priority to introduce the Uniform Civil Code in the country to improve the lives of women from all religion. The next article that we have for you today is a statement from the Madras High Court asking the government to come up with measures to eradicate manual scavenging in the country. Now, it is interesting to note that there are provisions in laws in India which actually ban the practice of manual scavenging. But the reality is, on ground, the practice still prevails and is a black mark on India's equality and commitment towards human rights. The government recently said that in the last 5 years, there has been no death related to manual scavenging. On the other hand, the national convener of Safai Karamchari Andolan said that in between 2016 and 2020, there have been 472 deaths owing to manual scavenging, of which 26 have happened in 2021 itself. The Safai Karmchari Andolan is an establishment created specially for the aim of eradicating manual scavenging. Now, there are multiple reasons why this problem still continues in India and why the government has not been able to put a restriction on it despite there being a law banning this inhuman practice. There is a lack of urgency and indifferent attitude in the government and the government agencies to tackle this problem. Also, when the governments have tried to outsource this function to an agency, there has not been proper accountability, and it has again forced the government and the society to go back on the age old practices of giving this work to the Dalits and the depressed classes in the society. It is more of a social issue now, especially in the rural areas where a specific community is expected to do this work without any proper safety or protective gear or without any rights given to them. In 1993, India banned the practice of manual scavenging under the Employment of Manual Scavengers and Construction of Dry Latrines Protection Act 1993. In 2013, the law was made even stronger by prohibiting all manual excrement cleaning of insanitary latrines, open drains, or pits. In fact, manual scavenging also finds a mention in the Prevention of Atrocities Act of 1989, which itself is an extremely tough law made to tackle the atrocities against the Dalits. However, for all those things, the reality still is that there have been 26 deaths of people involved in the practice of manual scavenging in 2021 itself. And all the more surprising, most of these deaths have happened in major cities, meaning that the number may have been much higher when you add on the unaccounted deaths taking place in rural or semi urban areas. The government in 2021 also started Safai Mitra Suraksha Challenge, where all the states were asked to ensure that there are sewer cleaning machines employed for this work rather than asking a person to go down the drain manually and clean everything because it is filled with poisonous gases. The people don't have protective gear. The people don't have any support staff to help them in the situation where they need certain help. The challenge also said that if it is unavoidable that a person has to go down the drain and has to work on a problem, then the person should be given all the preventive gears, tools, and machinery to help in the entire process. The Supreme Court also recently said that the government cannot overlook its responsibility and the government must identify everyone who has died in the sewage work since 1993 and provide a compensation of rupees 10 lakh each to the family of those victims. Despite all these efforts by the government in the past and this year, the problem still seems to persist. Many people may argue that the situation is improving on the ground, but the reality is different. In the ongoing PIL in the Madras High Court, the Safai Karmchari Andolan argued that the rupees 10 lakh compensation fixed by the court was way back in 2014. Since the cost of living has increased many times since then, the compensation also should increase to rupees 50 lakh, although the court has not taken any judgment on this demand. Also, do understand, not every Dalit is involved in manual scavenging work, but out of all the people involved in manual scavenging work, 90% of them are Dalits. So we cannot overlook the fact that this problem has a social base attached to it, and unless that is addressed, we would not be able to tackle it completely. The next article that we have for you is that the center government has approved incentives for sugarcane, cotton, and for jute farmers. Let's take the three one by one and discuss their present status of where they stand. Let's first talk about sugarcane. Now, the sugarcane industry has been in the debate for multiple reasons. Number one, it is a water guzzling crop, so government has been trying to discourage many farmers from growing sugarcane, especially in areas where water supply is not abundant. Secondly, India has a lot of excessive stock of sugar, because of which there is a lot of pending payment to be paid from the sugar mill side to the farmers, which has resulted in increasing debt of the farmer and leading to a lot of farmers' suicides. Now, what the government has tried to do in the past few years is government has tried to give a push to the ethanol blending program, under which the excess sugar can be converted to ethanol, which can be blended in petrol and used as a fuel in the country, which can have multiple advantages. We earlier had a target of achieving 20% ethanol blending in petrol by 2030. Now the government has preponed it to 2025. Currently, India blends 8.5% ethanol with its petrol. Now, as the article tells you, the government has increased the price of ethanol which will be used for blending. The article will tell you that the rates for C heavy molasses and B heavy molasses have been increased. Now, what is the difference between these? Let's try and understand. When sugarcane is crushed and the extracts that are taken out of it, the next process is to crystallize that into becoming sugar. From about 1 ton of sugarcane, we can expect 110 kg of sugar product. The remaining extracted material is then converted to ethanol to be blended in petrol and for other applications. That would be considered as C heavy molasses, meaning that it would have the least content of sugar because all the possible sugar was already extracted out of it. The second option can be B heavy molasses. In this process, in short, the sugar extracted is reduced so that more ethanol can be taken out of it. So, for instance, if we only take out 85 kg of sugar from 1 ton sugarcane and allow the rest of the extracted product to be converted to ethanol, that would be called as B heavy molasses, having more percentage of sugar and having the ability to give more ethanol as compared to the C heavy molasses. So if from 1 ton of sugarcane we could extract roughly 110 to 115 kg sugar, we would be able to extract about 11 liters of ethanol. On the other hand, if we only decide to extract 85 to 90 kg of sugar, the remaining material can be used to extract about 21 liters of ethanol. That would be B heavy molasses, which would have more sugar content as compared to C heavy molasses. Now, there are a lot of incentives behind the ethanol blending program. The first and the very obvious one is the reduction in the oil import bill. It is said that once India reaches a 20% target of ethanol blending, we can save up to $4 billion in import. It will also lead to more incentive for the farmers because the oil companies will be purchasing ethanol for blending directly from the farmers, giving them a good rate. Also, giving enough incentives to the farmers to grow sugarcane of higher quality. It will also impact emissions since ethanol blended petrol has lesser emissions of carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, and nitrogen oxides as compared to pure petrol. In fact, recently the Union Ministry of Road Transport and Highway mandated stickers on those vehicles which can run on E20, E85 that is 85% ethanol and even E100 that is 100% ethanol. Interestingly, TVS has launched the Apache motorbike that is designed to run on E80 or higher ethanol. So the companies are ready with this product once this product is available in the market. This is it about the sugarcane. Now coming to the cotton part of it. In the past few years, the cotton prices in the market have decreased significantly and have gone even below the MSP in the open market in many areas, thus forcing the government to buy cotton in large quantity at the MSP. Last year, the Cotton Corporation of India, that is the CCI, bought large amounts of cotton from the market at the MSP because the farmers were not available to sell it in the open market at a higher price. Thus, the Cotton Corporation of India faced a lot of losses, and the government has now compensated the CCI for those losses by paying about 17.5 thousand crore rupees and asked the corporation to keep on procuring cotton from the market once the prices go below the MSP. Now, the jute part. The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs has decided to make it compulsory for 100% of the food grains and 20% of the sugar to be packed in jute bags only. This will increase the production of jute and will also provide the much needed relief for the jute farmers as well. There are about 40 lakh jute farmers in India at present, most of whom are concentrated in the eastern part of India. The government itself purchased jute bags worth 8,000 crore rupees in the last year to pack the food grains that have been procured from the farmers at MSP. These were the articles that were important for discussing from the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of mains practice questions for you. Question number one. Multiple provisions in the Indian Constitution and several laws prohibiting the practice of manual scavenging haven't been able to eliminate this practice in the country. Examine the causes and suggest ways to overcome this problem. Second, do you support Indian government's argument of common but differentiated responsibility when it comes to mitigating the effects of climate change? Support your answer with appropriate examples. Both of these questions have to be answered within 250 words. Thank you so much for watching the video.